Sometimes all it takes is a smell. Just this morning, I was standing in my kitchen, fixin' a little tea, when I caught a whiff of something faint, sweet, with just a touch of cinnamon. Lord have mercy, it stopped me in my tracks. Took me straight back to the fall of 1942. I reckon it was just the way the sun hit that old chipped windowsill, or maybe the dust in the air playing tricks on me. But I swear, for a moment, I could smell Mama's apple pie, the one she used to bake right before the first cold snap. You young folks don't know nothing about that kind of pie. It wasn't store-bought fancy. It was the kind you made with bruised apples from the neighbor's tree and a crust rolled thin with a bottle, 'cause we didn't have a proper pin. But let me tell you, the way that smell filled our little kitchen, it felt like safety. Like home. That smell stirred something in me today. Something I hadn't thought about in a long while. You see, the world's real loud these days. Everyone talking about success and money and what folks don't have. I hear kids saying, "Granny must have been hard growing up so poor. Weren't you sad?" And I smile, but my heart always catches a little 'cause they don't understand. Not really. There's a story I've kept to myself for many years, but lately I've been thinking maybe it's time I shared it. Maybe it's time folks heard a different kind of truth. 'Cause back then, even with holes in our shoes and not a dime to rub together, we were rich in ways I can't rightly explain. We had each other. We had songs at sundown and biscuits from scratch. We had calloused hands and strong backs. And we laughed. Lord, did we laugh. Even when the roof leaked and the wind whistled through the cracks. I'm talking about a different kind of wealth. One you don't measure in dollars and cents. Back in my day, we didn't have much. Heck, we didn't have a pot to pee in, like my daddy used to say, but we made do. That was just the way things were back then. And I'll tell you what, there was a kind of dignity in that. A kind of beauty you don't see in shiny cars or big OL houses. But it wasn't all easy. No, sir. There were days when Mama's hands bled from sewing late into the night, and days when Daddy came in with his shoulders slumped from working dawn to dark for pennies. Days when we had nothing but cornbread and beans and still passed the plate like it was a Sunday feast. And yet, when I look back now, I don't see misery. I don't remember feeling empty. So maybe that's what I want to talk about today. Maybe it's time I take y'all back with me, back to the porch swings and the cracked linoleum floors, the patchwork quilts and the radio playing gospel hymns on Sunday morning. Back to when being poor didn't mean being broken. This ain't just a story about survival, darling. It's a story about grace, about what it means to have nothing and still feel like you've got the whole world in your arms. So, if you've got a few minutes, pour yourself a little tea, sit down a spell, and listen close. 'Cause the story I'm fixin' to tell, it may not sound like much at first, but I promise you, it's one you won't forget. I must have been about 7 or 8 when I first understood that we didn't have much. Not because someone told me heavens, no, but because of the way Mama used to whisper when she counted out change from the coffee tin, or how Daddy would stay a little longer out by the barn, hat in his hands, staring at nothing. Still, back then, I didn't know what it meant to be poor. Not really. To me, the world was big and warm and smelled like fresh-cut hay, with smoke, and Miss Lottie's biscuits drifting over the fence line. We lived in a little white farmhouse with chipped paint and a satin porch out front, just 3 miles from where the railroad cut through the cornfields. We didn't have a car not till much later, so we walked most everywhere or hitched rides when we could. The rhythm of our days was set by the sun and the seasons. Summer was for canning peaches and catching lightning bugs in old mason jars. Fall meant gathering the last of the okra and stringing up quilts to air out in the cool wind. I remember standing barefoot in the yard, watching Mama's patchwork quilt flap on the line. That quilt was older than I was, stitched together from pieces of Daddy's work shirts, Ruthie's dresses, and scraps of flour sacks. Every patch had a story. I'd run my fingers over the fabric and wonder who we'd been when those clothes were new. Ruthie, my sister, she was always dreamin' big. Said she was gonna go to Chicago and sing in one of those supper clubs where the girls wore sparkly dresses and heels higher than the moon. But she never left. Not really. She stayed when Daddy got sick and helped Mama at the sewing table, even when her hands ached. Me, I was quieter, more the listening type. I'd sit with my doll on the porch swing and make up stories in my head about folks riding the trains I could hear in the distance. I believed, with my whole little heart, that people were mostly good, that kindness mattered, and that if you loved someone strong enough, they'd always find their way back to you. That's just how I saw the world. And back then, even simple things felt like magic. Morning started with the scratch of the screen door and the sound of Daddy pouring water from the pump. Mama would hum while she cooked, always something low and soft, like a lullaby wrapped in sorrow. Breakfast might have been just cornmeal mush with a drizzle of sorghum, but we ate like kings. And when it rained, the whole house would smell like damp earth and old wood, and we'd all curl up together by the stove, telling stories or just listening to the crackle. We didn't know we were missing out on anything. We didn't have no telephone, no refrigerator, and our only heat came from the wood Daddy split by hand. But we had Sunday dresses Mama made from feet socks, and we had each other. That counted for more than anything. There's a peace that comes from growing up slow, from knowing the names of every tree, from shelling peas with your knees touching your sisters, from seeing your mama's hands busy from dawn till night and never hearing her complain. Lord, she was a quiet woman, but strong like hickory. She used to say, Alma Rose, the good Lord don't give us more than we can carry. And if we carry it together, well, it don't feel so heavy. And I believed her. I believed a lot of things then. That good folks always got what they deserved. That Daddy's back would never break. That time didn't run so fast. I didn't know yet that one day I'd sit in a quiet kitchen with just the tick of the clock and a memory for company. But I remember that quilt on the line, flopping like a flag in the wind. And somehow that's where it all begins. It was the fall of 43, just as the leaves were turning that burnt orange color that made the hills behind our house look like they were on fire. I remember the morning clear as yesterday. The air had that nip in it, the kind that made Mama pull the quilts up tighter and wrap our feet in rags till the stove warmed up. I was helping her hang laundry out by the line when we heard the sound of tires on gravel. Now, we didn't get visitors often, not out where we lived. So when that army truck pulled up just past the fence, dust billowing up behind it like a ghost, we both stopped what we were doing. Turned out it wasn't for us. The McCreary boy down the road had joined up, and the army man was just dropping a telegram. But in the back of that truck, sitting real quiet, was a boy I didn't recognize. Slim, maybe 16 or 17, wearing hand-me-down boots and a red scarf wrapped around his neck like he was trying to hold himself together. He caught my eye for just a second before the truck pulled away. And I don't know why, but my heart did something strange, not like butterflies now. More like it skipped, then caught up all at once. I didn't say nothing to Mama, but all day I kept thinking about that scarf. Bright red, like a cardinal in winter. 2 days later, that same boy showed up at church with Miss Lottie. She stood up at the front and said he was her nephew, William, come from Memphis to stay with her while his mama was sick. He didn't talk much, just nodded polite, eyes low. But something about him, there was this quiet weight he carried, like he'd seen more than a boy should. I watched him all through the hymns, pretending to read from my little songbook, but I was just sneaking glances. I didn't even understand it then, just that my chest felt fuller around him, like something was stretching inside me, making room. After service, we all stood out under the oak trees, eating cornbread and talking like we always did. William was standing off to the side when Daddy walked over and asked if he liked fishing. He nodded again, and Daddy said, "Well now, reckon you oughta come by next Saturday. Alma's a good shot with a cane pole. She'll show you the ropes." I near about died right there on the church lawn. But the way William smiled, just barely, like it hurt a little, made my stomach flutter like a whole jar of them lightning bugs I used to catch. The next Saturday, he did come by. We walked down to the creek, not saying much, just listening to the crunch of leaves and the hum of cicadas. He held the pole like he'd never fished before, but he listened real close. At one point, I looked over and caught him looking at me, not in a silly way, but like he was trying to memorize something. I remember blushing so bad I pretended to fix my braid just to look away. I couldn't explain it then. I didn't have words for the way my heart moved when he was near. But I knew it mattered. I knew, somehow, that day by the creek wasn't just a Saturday. It was the start of something. He gave me the red scarf that winter, said he didn't need it no more, that I should have it. I kept it folded in my top drawer for years, even after he was gone. And even now, sometimes when the wind turns cold, I still reach for it out of habit. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the first time I understood that feeling of being seen, of mattering. And Lord knows, sometimes that's more than enough to change a life. I don't reckon I'll ever forget the winter Daddy got sick. It came on slow, like a shadow stretching long across the field at sundown. At first it was just a cough, something he'd wave off with a laugh, and a sip of that godawful root tea Mama made from dandelion and bark. Said he was just tired from the cotton picking season, said it was the cold settling in his bones. But it didn't go away. And soon enough, the laugh faded. That winter was mean, cold as sin and twice as cruel. The kind that gets into your joints and makes the wind howl through the cracks in the walls. We stuffed rags around the windows and kept the stove burning low 'cause we didn't have the money for extra coal. Mama stayed up late sewing by lamplight just to buy medicine. I remember waking up to the sound of her crying once, trying to keep it quiet, her sewing needles still in her hand. I didn't say nothing. I just lay there listening, staring up at the shadows on the ceiling, wondering why the world felt heavier than it did before. Daddy started missing church. That was the first real sign. He was a quiet man, but Lord, he loved his Sundays. Loved the hymns, the smell of old hymnals, the sound of boots scuffing wood floors. When he didn't get up one Sunday morning, Mama just said, "He's resting, baby." That's all. But I saw the way she looked at him like she was trying to memorize his face. He didn't want the doctor. Said it cost too much. Said he'd shake it off. But the cough got worse, and by Christmas, he was too weak to get out of bed. I remember sitting by him, holding his hand, watching the firelight flicker on the quilt Mama had made when they was first married. He whispered to me, "Alma Rose, you keep looking forward, now. Don't let the cold stop your growing." I didn't understand what he meant, not then. I just nodded and tried not to cry. I thought if I didn't cry, maybe it wouldn't be real. Maybe he'd be better by morning. But he wasn't. And when he passed, it was like the color drained out of everything. Mama didn't say much. She just kept moving. Folding clothes, chopping wood, feeding chickens. Like if she stopped for even a second, she'd fall apart and never come back. Ruthie and I, we tried to fill the space, but it was too big, too hollow. And I'll tell you something, I was angry. Not at Daddy, no. At the world. At God, maybe. I didn't know how to say it out loud, but it sat in my chest like a stone. I kept thinking, why us? Why now? It wasn't fair. We already had so little. Why take the only steady thing we had? And more than that, I was ashamed. Ashamed I didn't know how to help Mama. Ashamed I felt jealous every time I saw William walking home with Miss Lottie, like his world hadn't caved in. I hated that feeling, hated how small and selfish it made me feel. But I couldn't help it. I felt lost. I remember one evening, not long after the funeral, sitting on the porch steps with that red scarf wrapped around my neck, and Ruthie came out, sat down beside me real quiet. She didn't say nothing for a long time, just looked out at the field. Then she said, "He didn't leave us, you know. He just ran out of days." And somehow that made the tears come. Thick, hot ones I couldn't stop. And she let me cry. Held my hand like Mama used to. That was the first time I knew. Loss don't come all at once. It comes in waves. And sometimes the hardest part ain't the losing. It's what's left behind to carry. It was a Monday. I remember that much. The kind of Monday where the sky's just one big gray sheet, and the wind bites through your coat like it's looking for your bones. Mama was kneading dough in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, flour on her cheeks like snow. I was mending socks by the fire, my fingers raw from all that darning, when Miss Lottie came to the door. She didn't knock, just opened it real slow and stepped in like she was walking into a church. Her eyes were red, hands trembling, and in them, a letter. A letter with a crease down the middle and a return address from Memphis. I knew right away. Before she said a word, I knew. My chest went tight like the air had turned to glue. She held the letter out to Mama first. Couldn't say nothing, just shook her head real soft. Mama wiped her hands on her apron, but she didn't reach for it. She just looked at me. I took it. My hands, they were already shaken. I remember the paper felt heavy, heavier than a letter ought to feel. I looked at the ink. Neat, official, cold. "We regret to inform you." That's how it started. William had gone back to Memphis after New Year's. Said his mama needed him. Said he'd write. Said he'd be back come spring. I waited. Every Sunday I waited. I told myself he was just fizzy, that the mail was slow, that maybe he was trying to find work to help his mama. I kept the red scarf by my bed, tied it around my pillow some nights like a promise. But that letter, Lord, that letter said he'd been caught in a fight near the river. Said he'd stepped in when some boys were beating on another. Said he'd tried to stop it. Said he never made it home. 22 years old. Gone. Just like that. I remember hearing the clock tick, just ticking and ticking, like it didn't know the world had stopped. I don't know how long I stood there holding that letter. My hands went numb. I couldn't feel my feet. I couldn't hear Mama or Miss Lottie no more. Just that one sentence over and over in my head. He never made it home. My heart cracked the day, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet like glass breaking under snow. I didn't cry. Not right away. I went out to the porch. Sat down on that same swing where we'd talked the night before he left. The chain creaked under me like it remembered too. The wind picked up and the trees started moaning. And that's when it hit me. He was gone. He was really gone. And I hadn't even told him what I felt. Hadn't told him that sometimes I laid awake at night imagining a life with him, a little house, 2 kids, maybe a garden. Hadn't told him that when he looked at me, I felt seen in a way no one ever had. I felt safe. I felt enough. And now he was gone. The scarf, I clutched it so tight my knuckles went white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run to that river in Memphis and drag him back. But instead, I just sat there rocking while the world kept ticking like nothing had happened. That was the day I learned you don't always get to say goodbye. That some stories don't finish neat. And that grief, it don't come with instructions. It just shows up, uninvited, and moves in. And you live with it. You make tea with it. You fold laundry beside it. But you never forget the moment the clock stopped, even if the rest of the world kept on ticking. After William died, the world just quieted. Not the kind of peace that feels good, no. It was a heavy, strange quiet, like somebody turned the volume down on life and forgot to turn it back up. I went about the days like I was wearing someone else's skin. Moving, breathing, smiling when I had to, but not really feeling any of it. Mama said grief was like laundry. It just kept coming, even when you didn't have the strength to face it. And Lord, was she right. I'd be hanging clothes out on the line and suddenly remember the way William's hands looked when he fixed that crooked gate out by Miss Lottie's, and I'd lose my breath, just stand there staring at the sky like it had answers. But it never did. The world moved on as it does. Corn still needed picking. Chickens still needed feeding. Ruthie got herself a job in town, helping at the mercantile. Mama kept sewing, kept praying. And I just kept getting up in the morning. That was the best I could do. I stopped sitting on the porch, stopped humming to myself when I cooked. I even stopped writing in my little book of thoughts, the one I used to hide under my pillow. There just didn't seem to be anything left worth saying. And the worst part? I started to wonder if I'd made too much of it all. Maybe I'd only dreamed it meant more than it did. Maybe William hadn't loved me the way I thought. That kind of doubt, it creeps in slow, makes a home in your chest. And you can't shake it, not even when you know better. I didn't talk about him no more. Folks stopped to skin. That's just how we did it in those days. We carried our pain quiet. Didn't spill it out on the floor for others to step around. You tucked it into your apron pocket and kept stirring the soup. But deep down, something shifted in me. I wasn't the same girl who'd walked barefoot through the creek with her heart wide open. That part of me had folded in on itself. I didn't stop believing in people exactly, but I stopped expecting much. I stopped hoping quite so big. I still said grace, still smiled at babies and helped Mama press the linens. But the spark I used to feel, that fire in my chest when the wind caught just right, it dulled. I guess that's what loss does. Not just talking what you loved, but changing what you are. And nobody noticed, not really. Maybe Ruthie did. She looked at me different sometimes, like she wanted to ask something, but didn't know how. I think she carried her own grief too, in ways I never understood back then. So we just went on, sisters side by side, in a house that echoed more than it used to. One night, months after the letter came, I found that red scarf again. It had slipped behind my dresser, dusty and a little stiff with time. I held it for a long while, sat on the edge of my bed with it balled up in my lap like it could answer the ache. And you know what? I didn't cry. Not that night. I just sat there in the dark, breathing real slow, letting the silence be what it was. That was the night I knew grief don't go away. It settles. It makes room. And you live beside it like an old neighbor you wave at, but don't invite in. I wasn't whole anymore, but I was still here. And somehow, that had to be enough. It was near spring when I felt the first tug, like something small had woken up inside me after a long sleep. The frost was still on the ground most mornings, but the days had started stretching out again, and the robins were singing in the hedges like they had something to be proud of. I'd gone into town with Ruthie to pick up sugar and lye for soap, and we passed by the old church steps where a woman sat wrapped in a threadbare shawl, holding a baby so small you could have cradled it in one hand. I didn't know her, don't reckon she was from around Dyer County, but there was something in her face that made me stop. Not just sadness, but the kind of emptiness I knew too well. She wasn't begging. She wasn't saying a word. Just rocking that baby with her eyes on the ground, like she was trying to disappear. Ruthie tugged my arm, whispered, "We ain't got nothing to give, Alma." And Lord, she was right. We barely had enough flour for biscuits that week. But something in me, quiet and stubborn, said no, not this time. I went home that afternoon and told Mama I was gonna bake bread. Real bread. Not the kind from scraps and leftovers. The kind that rises proper, with yeast and patience and warmth. Mama looked at me funny, but didn't ask questions. Just handed me what was left in the tin. Said, if you're gonna do it with heart. I stayed up that night kneading the dough, watching it rise by lamplight, smelling that warm, sweet scent that wrapped around the house like a lullaby. It reminded me of before the letter, before the quiet. The next morning, I wrapped that loaf in a clean dish towel and walked the 3 miles back into town. My boots were muddy and my fingers numb, but I didn't stop. That woman was still there. Same spot, same shawl. Her baby was crying this time, soft and tired. I didn't say a word, just handed her the bread. She looked up at me, eyes wide like she wasn't sure if I was real. And when she took it, her hands shook. She whispered, "God bless you," and I nodded, turned, and walked away before I started crying. That walk home felt different, lighter somehow, like I'd left a piece of that old ache behind. Not gone, but softer. That night, as I sat on the porch for the first time in months, I caught myself humming again. Just a little tune Mama used to sing when she stirred the stew. I didn't even realize I was doing it, till Ruthie poked her head out the screen door and said, "Well, I'll be." She's humming again. I blushed, but I didn't stop. The next Sunday, I went back to church. Not 'cause I was fixed, not 'cause everything was better, but because I wanted to be near the music. Near the sound of people singing with their whole hearts, even when life had knocked them down a peg. I sang soft, but I sang. And when Miss Lottie squeezed my hand after the final hymn, I felt that warmth again, the kind you don't buy or borrow. The kind that grows. That week I baked another loaf. And another. Not every day, just when I had enough. I gave them to whoever needed them most. Didn't ask questions. Didn't need thanks. And in that simple act, flour, water, care, I started to feel like maybe I still had something left to give. Maybe grief and hope could live side by side. Maybe I didn't have to be who I was before to still be whole. Just different. Just softer in the places where I'd once been hard. That loaf of bread didn't change the world, but it sure changed me. It had been almost 2 years since the letter came when I finally made the walk to the river. Not the creek out back where we used to fish now. I mean the river down past the old mill, where the trees hang low and the rocks are smooth from years of running water. I'd been thinking about going for months, but I kept putting it off. Told myself it wasn't the right time. Told myself there wasn't nothing to gain. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of what I might feel. Scared of what I might have to let go. I carried the scarf in my pocket, the red one William gave me. It was worn now, the edges frayed, soft as cotton clouds. I hadn't worn it in a long time, but I couldn't seem to put it away either. It was like holding on to a piece of him, or maybe a piece of the girl I used to be. The walk down was quiet. Just the crunch of gravel and the wind whispering through the trees. My knees ached and my hands were cold, but I didn't stop. When I got to the riverbank, I stood there a long time, looking at the water move. Fast in places, slow in others, like it couldn't make up its mind. I sat down on an old fallen log and held the scarf in my lap. I don't rightly know how long I sat there. Long enough for the birds to forget I was there. Long enough for the silence to settle over me like a blanket. And then, I cried. Not soft, polite tears, not this time. I cried like that little girl who lost her daddy. Like the young woman who never got to say goodbye. Like someone who'd carried too much for too long. I cried for all of it. For the dreams I'd buried. For the nights I stayed strong when I didn't want to be. for the love that lived in me with nowhere to go. And when the tears stopped, I reached into my coat and pulled out the stone. I'd taken it from the creek the day William gave me that scarf. He'd skipped it across the water, then handed it to me, saying, "Keep this. Smooth ones like this VE already been through a lot. That's what makes 'em beautiful." I never told anyone I kept it. Just carried it round like a secret. I held it up to the light now, tinning it in my hand. It was still smooth, still cool, still quiet, just like me. I walked to the edge of the water and knelt down, pressing the stone into the mud at the bank. I didn't toss it, didn't bury it, just placed it there like setting down a burden. Then I took the scarf, that soft, tired thing, and laid it over the stone. Let the water kiss its edges. I whispered, "Thank you," and turned to go. I didn't look back. That was the day I chose to stop carrying ghosts. The day I let the past stay the past, not because it didn't matter, but because it had shaped me enough. It didn't have to weigh me down anymore. I walked home lighter, not fixed, not new, but clean somehow, like I'd washed something off that had clung to me too long. When Ruthie asked where I'd been, I just smiled and said, "Down to the river." And that night I slept straight through till morning. No dreams. No ache, just rest. I reckon that's what acceptance feels like. Not joy, not sorrow, just peace. I still think of William. Of course I do. But now when I do, I see sunlight on the water and feel that smooth stone in my palm. I don't feel lost anymore. I feel like I made it through. I chose to live, without bitterness, without regret, just forward. Sometimes I sit here, watching the world through this old kitchen window, and I think, mercy, how fast everything's changed. Y'all have gadgets now that talk back to you, cars that don't need keys, and folks ordering supper through a screen. And yet, with all that convenience, it feels like people carry more worry than we ever did. I see it in their eyes, like they're always behind, like nothing is ever enough. But I'll tell you something true. We didn't have much, but we didn't live empty. Back in my day, we made do. If something tore, we patched it. If the money ran out, we got creative. If a neighbor was struggling, you brought end biscuits without a skin. Why? Life wasn't about having more. It was about holding on to what mattered. We worked hard, we loved quiet, and we let go when we had to. And we cried when it hurt, but not in front of the chickens, as Daddy used to say. I reckon the biggest thing I've learned in all my years is this. You can't wait for life to be fair before you start living it. You can't sit around hoping for someone to hand you happiness like it's a warm plate of pie. You've got to find your own sweetness even when the pantry's bare. Lord knows I've lost things I thought I couldn't live without. My daddy, my first love, even parts of myself along the way. But each time I fell, I got back up, not 'cause I'm some kind of hero, just 'cause that's what we did. That's how we did it back then. And I'll tell you what, it wasn't always pretty. We didn't have therapy or podcasts or 10-step plans for healing. We had front porches and long walks. We had folks who said, "I see you, baby," without needing to say another word. I suppose what I'm trying to say is, you don't need a perfect life to have a meaningful one. You don't need to wait until you're ready or brave or whole. Sometimes you just start where you are with cracked hands and a tired heart, and you plant something. Maybe it's bread, maybe it's kindness, maybe it's just a quiet moment you give to someone who needs it. And that's enough. That's more than enough. We never had a lot, but we had each other. We had supper on the table, even if it was just beans and cornbread. We had stories round the fire, hands holding hands under the quilt, and laughter. The kind that comes from knowing you're not carrying it alone. I don't envy the noise of today's world. All these opinions flying round like flies at a picnic, everyone trying to outshout the next. I think maybe Y'all need more silence, more sitting still, more watching the way the light shifts on a wooden floor and being grateful just to see it. So, if you're listening to this and your heart's feeling heavy, if you've been waiting for permission to move on, to forgive, to start over, maybe it's time to stop waiting. Maybe what you're looking for ain't on the horizon, but already in your hands. You just ain't been still long enough to notice. The world will keep rushing. Let it. You go slow. You breathe deep. You hold what's good and let go of what ain't. And when it hurts, 'cause it will, you keep going. Just like we did. That's how we made it through. And darling, so can you. You know, I've had a lot of years to think on things. Long nights, slow mornings, rainy afternoons, plenty of time for remembering. And if there's one thing I keep circling back to, it's this. We weren't trying to be wise back then. We were just trying to get by. And somehow in all that struggling, we learned what really mattered. Not through sermons or books, but through living, through losing, through holding each other up when the bottom dropped out. I think about how different things are now. Folks got more of everything, more choices, more noise, more stuff, but they also seem more lost. Like they're chasing something they can't name. Back then, we didn't have time to chase. We had crops to tend, children to raise, hands to hold. We didn't ask if we were happy, we asked if we were needed. And Lord, there's a kind of peace that comes from knowing you're needed. That you make someone stay a little easier just by being in it. I look at my grandkids now, bless their hearts, always rushing toward the next thing, the next job, the next upgrade, the next answer. And I want to tell them, slow down, baby. Sometimes the thing you're looking for is already sitting at your table. But I don't say it out loud. Not always. I just make sure the coffee's hot and the pie is fresh, and I wait for them to sit long enough to listen. 'Cause when folks finally do stop, when the world gets quiet for just a moment, that's when truth has a chance to be heard. And the truth I've come to know is this. You don't need much to live a full life. You just need to be present in the one you've got. We had cracked windows and patched up socks. Yes, we did. But we had stories. We had trust. We had the kind of love that didn't shout, but stayed. Love that showed up, chopped wood, carried water, wiped tears without being asked. You can't buy that. And you sure can't download it. These days, people wait too long to live. Wait for the debt to clear, the grief to ease, the timing to be right. But life don't wait. It keeps moving even when you're scared, even when you're unsure. And maybe it's time you stopped waiting too. Maybe it's time to write that letter, call that person, plant that seed, bake that bread. Not 'cause the world's ready, but because you are. Or you could be. If you let yourself. I used to think my life was small. Just a patch of land, a string of ordinary days, a handful of people who came and went. But now I know better. It was full. It is full. And if I could go back and speak to that girl with dirt under her fingernails and hope in her chest, I'd tell her, you don't have to prove anything. Just keep showing up. That's enough. So, if you're listening now, wondering what to do with the ache in your chest or the fear in your gut, maybe this is your sign. Maybe you don't need to figure it all out today. Maybe you just need to start with something small, with what you've got, right where you are, because the life you're waiting for, it might already be happening. Quiet, simple, beautiful in its own way. You just gotta be still long enough to see it. And maybe, just maybe, it's time you stopped waiting too. Well now, if you've stayed with me this far, bless your heart. That means you've sat through a whole life, really. Not the whole thing, of course, just the pieces I could fit into words. The quiet ones, the ones that still knock around in my chest when the night gets still. And I want to thank you for listening. Truly. Because stories like mine, well, they ain't loud. They don't shout. They live in small kitchens and back porches and the smell of biscuits on a cold morning. They're easy to miss if you ain't paying attention. But they matter. Lord, how they matter. You know, when my grandson asked me that question, Granny, was it hard being poor? I smiled. Not 'cause it wasn't hard. It was. But because he didn't know the half of it. And I didn't want him to feel sorry for me. I wanted him to understand that hard ain't the same as hopeless. That emptiness of pocket don't always mean emptiness of heart. We didn't have much, but we had music. We had laughter. We had hands to hold and chores to share, and the kind of love that didn't need a name to be known. And maybe that's why I've told you all this, not just to remember, but to remind. To remind you that some things, the best things, don't come with price tags or promises. They come in moments. Quiet ones, hard-earned ones, full ones. Sometimes I still sit on the porch with my tea and wonder if William would have stayed had the world been kinder. I wonder what our life might have looked like. 2 rocking chairs, a garden full of beans, a little girl with his laugh. And sometimes, I think I feel him, not in a ghost story way, no, just a warmth, a familiar hush when the wind shifts right, like maybe some kind of memory remembers me too. I know that sounds silly, but age makes you softer about things you can't prove, and it makes you bold enough to say, out loud anyway. I guess what I'm trying to leave with you is this. Don't wait too long to love what's in front of you. Don't wait for things to be easier or prettier or more certain. Life's already happening right now. In the mess, in the noise, in the quiet moments you think don't count. They do. They always did. And maybe you've been holding back. Maybe you're scared to start again. Maybe you think you've missed your moment. But let me tell you something, honey, if you're breathing, your moment ain't past. It's just waiting for you to show up. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but I am saying it'll be worth it. So let me ask you something, now that I've told you all this. Do you think real love is supposed to come back? I used to think so. I used to believe that if something was meant to be, it would find its way. And maybe that's true. Or maybe, sometimes the love that stays is the one you build after everything's been broken. Maybe the truest love is the one you give yourself permission to feel again, even after the world told you not to. I don't know for sure, but I do know this, we were poor, but we were full. And hearts like that, they don't fade easy. So I'll leave you with that. A full heart, a quiet house. And one more question to carry with you, just a little while longer. What are you still waiting for, darling? And what might happen if you stopped?